We have disagreements. My hope in traveling to China is to reestablish contact. There are a new group of leaders. We need to get to know one another, and we need to discuss our disagreements with one another so that we don't have misunderstandings, don't misunderstand one another's intentions.
Welcome back. That was, of course, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen speaking to MSNBC recently about her trip to China. As we mentioned, Yellen's visit comes after President Xi met with the leaders of Russia and India as Beijing tries to expand its global influence amid growing tensions with the West. And joining us now is the South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson. He is a member of the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Congressman Johnson, I appreciate your being here. I hope you had a good Fourth. I want to get right down to the business of, well, what we're witnessing happening overseas right now. The Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, you've heard her downplay recently the expectations for this visit. But what does success in your eyes look like in the near term in the U.S.'s dealings with China?
Well, I would say, first off, when Secretary Yellen is in China, I certainly hope her tone is one of firmness rather than flirtation. We do want to make sure that we're talking to China. That communication is critically important. But I think, at different times in this relationship, particularly with the Biden administration, have looked almost supplicant, as though we're trying to make sure that China likes us. This is a relationship that we've got to rebalance. We have got to make sure that this relationship serves American interests rather than just Chinese interests. And as far as what does success look like in this relationship long term, we have got to see some behavior change with the Chinese Communist Party. We cannot let them continue to undermine the basic American and world values of liberty, prosperity, and freedom.
And Congressman, for clarity, the president has been anything but flirtatious with President Xi recently. Behind closed doors in the last several weeks, President Biden called President Xi Jinping a dictator. Do you agree with that?
Well, I thought that I give the president some kudos for that statement. I think that was maybe on an unintentional bit of truth telling from him. There was some walking back from the administration because,
but he said it publicly and stood by it.
That's right. Well, and frankly, let's be honest. Xi Jinping is a dictator. It's not the kind of thing you normally say in sweet diplomatic talk. But I give the president kudos for coming right out and saying it.
All right, fine. Let me ask you about this visit. It comes, of course, at a time when President Xi is meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin, India's Prime Minister Modi there as well, meeting virtually. How concerned you are about China's dealings with these two countries at this time?
I wouldn't overstate the importance of this summit. It's been going on for 20 years. I think it is noteworthy that India, the host, decided to have this be a virtual summit. Modi, I was part of the escort team for the prime minister when he was in D.C. a couple of weeks ago, did have an opportunity to briefly talk with him. And while he was in Washington, he talked a lot about the importance of democratic values. I don't think he liked the look of having Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin strutting around his country. So the move to a virtual summit was good news.
So President Xi reportedly warned Putin against using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That's one of the new headlines, first came from the FT. Is that an encouraging sign, or is it something that you're skeptical about?
I do want to see even more from the Chinese Communist Party. They could help make sure that this Ukrainian-Russian conflict moves in the right direction. There is all kinds of evidence that they have been providing aid, non-lethal, non-weapon aid to Russia, but aid nonetheless. I like the fact that they're warning against nuclear arms or nuclear action, but I'd like to see them go even further.
Let me ask you about that region for a minute. Some striking new polling from NBC shows that a majority of Republican primary voters right now say they would be less likely to vote for a candidate who supports funding Ukraine's war effort. You clearly have backed additional funding for Ukraine. What is your reaction to that number, and what is the consequence if the majority of Republicans, majority of members of your party get their way on that issue?
This is not a binary issue where it's either yes to more money or no, never to any more money. Most primary voters I talk to, and frankly, most members of Congress, they'd want to make sure that whatever we do in the future doesn't look like a blank check. We do need some accountability. It has been a lot of money. We do want to make sure the Ukrainian government is making good use of those dollars. And most primary voters I talk to are a lot more interested in providing lethal aid, making sure that the Ukrainian soldiers have the ammunition they need to hold the line. They're more comfortable with that than checks for, 10 or 20 or $30 billion.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not what our poll shows, though. And obviously, it's not what a lot of Republican lawmakers, frankly, have said publicly as well on this issue, right? I mean, what is the consequence, do you think, if that were to happen, if the funding were to stop? What's the risk if these voters, at least according to this polling by a wide margin, got their way?
Well, ask stupid questions, you're going to get stupid answers. This is not a binary issue where it's yes or no. I think most Americans who follow this at all have a nuanced view of this. They know that Putin is the bad guy. They know that the Ukrainians need to have the primary responsibility for defending their country. But to some degree, they know that freedom-loving countries in America, like America and in Europe, have a role to play. I think the American voter has a lot more nuance than maybe the question would let on.
Let me ask you about President Biden. He's meeting with the Swedish Prime Minister today as Sweden is angling to get, to get into NATO right now. Why doesn't the administration deserve credit for how it's fortified and even expanded NATO to this point?
I don't know that I'm denying them any credit. I do think we want to take a long.
The leading Republican voice, Donald Trump, is, I guess. So I just say that as you may not be, but many Republicans have been denying the president for credit, I think, for his handling of this circumstance. Do you think that's unfair?
If we're going to be frank and earnest, there is so little confidence among, among Republican members of Congress for the competence of the Biden administration. I just don't think they're inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think particularly when you talk about, there are times when I think the Biden administration does good things, of course.
I mean, isn't NATO, do we agree that NATO's stronger? I'm going to be in Vilnius with the president next week. NATO's going to be stronger than it's been, and certainly in the last, I think, several years, perhaps in the last decade plus. There's a new name that's joined it, Finland. The president will be there as well, and Sweden may join it soon.
I wouldn't want to give Joe Biden too much credit for that. I think Vladimir Putin deserves the lion's share of the credit for the sense of unity that the NATO countries have. When you're talking about, new entrants, though, you immediately get to Ukraine. And I do think there are some very prominent voices that want to make sure that anything we do with regard to NATO expansion is going to make the world safer as opposed to less safe.
Let me ask you a little bit about politics, if I can, before we go. Your state's two senators both have publicly backed Tim Scott for president. Who are you leaning toward? Anybody that you will not back in this race?
I don't really do endorsements. I've grown more and more irritated by them. I just don't know that any South Dakota primary voter is going to vote a particular way because Dusty Johnson tells them so. So I'm not planning to endorse anybody. Tim Scott would be a great president of the United States. I would be ecstatic if he was elected, but that doesn't mean I'm going to endorse him or anybody else.
All right. Well,
thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.